Callum Tierney and Dritan Hoxha's names would soon be written in blood across New York City, as two criminal empires collided in a deadly war that no one saw coming. Please subscribe for daily, new update of crime story, and watch till end. In the shadows of New York City, a new force quietly emerged, bringing with it a wave of fear that no one in the criminal underworld could ignore. Dritan Hoxha, an Albanian kingpin with a reputation for ruthless efficiency, had arrived on American soil with a carefully chosen team of loyal enforcers. They were not just criminals. They were soldiers trained in violence and strategy, and their mission was simple yet deadly: to dominate the East Coast drug trade and eliminate any opposition standing in their way. Dritan's presence was a storm waiting to break, and even the most seasoned gangs felt a chill run down their spines at the mention of his name. Across the city, the Liverpool crew, led by Callum Tierney, had long controlled the streets with a mixture of charm, cunning, and sheer brutality. Tierney's crew had grown from small-time hustlers into a network that stretched from Brooklyn to Manhattan, dealing in drugs, weapons, and shadowy alliances. Their reputation was built on precision hits were calculated, operations executed with military-like coordination, and betrayal was punished swiftly and mercilessly. Tierney himself was a mastermind, a man who could predict his rivals' moves before they even conceived them. But even he knew that Dritan Hoxha was a different threat altogether, one that could upend everything the Liverpool crew had built. The first few weeks were filled with tension and subtle threats. Dritan did not announce his arrival with fanfare. Instead, he let whispers circulate through the city. Encrypted messages, mysterious surveillance, and sudden disappearances hinted at his presence. He tested Tierney from a distance, probing the crew's defenses, gauging their reactions, and planting seeds of fear. It was psychological warfare as much as it was physical, a battle of wits that left both sides alert, anxious, and ready for anything. Tierney responded cautiously, sending scouts into Albanian territory, monitoring every movement and analyzing the new gang's tactics. Every minor skirmish or unexplained incident was dissected, every pattern observed. But despite his meticulous planning, Tierney could feel the ground shifting beneath him. The Albanians were not merely strong, they were strategic, disciplined, and unflinchingly violent. Unlike other gangs Tierney had faced, Dritan's men did not panic, did not hesitate, and seemed to anticipate every countermeasure before it was even enacted. The tension reached a boiling point when minor clashes erupted in the city's backstreets, quick, brutal encounters that left both sides wary and on edge. The Liverpool crew had never faced an enemy who struck with such precision and disappeared without a trace. New York's criminal underworld began to buzz with rumors of impending war. Dealers, smugglers, and low-level enforcers whispered in fear about the Albanians' arrival, about Dritan Hoxha's intelligence network, and about the unstoppable momentum of his crew. As the days passed, both gangs prepared for the inevitable confrontation. Each side reinforced their networks, secured safe houses, and trained for the violence they knew was coming. In the quiet moments, Tierney studied maps, scrutinized surveillance footage, and tried to predict Dritan's next move. But even with all his experience, he could not shake the feeling that the Albanians had changed the rules of the game entirely. The city itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the moment when the war would explode onto the streets, leaving destruction and blood in its wake. The stage was set for a battle unlike any the East Coast had ever seen. Two powerful criminal empires, each ruthless in its own right, were about to collide. And at the center of it all, Dritan Hoxha and Callum Tierney stood as opposing forces, calculating, patient, and ready to strike with deadly precision. The war was only beginning, and no one could predict who would survive when the Albanian Mafia declared its intentions in the heart of New York City. The first strike came like a thunderclap in the dead of night, shattering the uneasy calm that had settled over New York. Evan Malone, a trusted lieutenant of Callum Tierney, had been walking through a narrow alley in Brooklyn when the shadows came alive. Bullets tore through the darkness, ricocheting off brick walls and leaving a trail of chaos. Malone barely managed to dive behind a dumpster, his heart pounding, as the attackers vanished as quickly as they had appeared. When the smoke cleared, it was clear that the Albanians had made their move, and their message was unmistakable. They would not negotiate. They were here to dominate, and anyone in their path would be destroyed. Tierney's crew was shaken to its core. Malone's narrow escape was a warning that the Liverpool gang could no longer rely on the streets they had once controlled. Tierney immediately called an emergency meeting in a hidden warehouse, where he laid out the severity of the situation. Every member understood that the Albanians were disciplined, highly organized, and lethal. Their strategy was not random. It was calculated, designed to destabilize the Liverpool crew and take control of the drug trade and territory. The stakes had escalated, and the crew knew that a mere show of force would not be enough to survive. Tierney decided to strike back, targeting one of Dritan Hoxha's warehouses in Queens. The operation was risky, requiring careful planning, precise timing, and absolute secrecy. Tierney divided his men into squads, assigning each a specific task: entry, diversion, and extraction. They moved like shadows, silent and unseen, approaching the warehouse under the cover of darkness. Inside, crates of weapons and drugs signaled the Albanians' growing power. But before the crew could secure their target, an ambush erupted. Dritan's men had anticipated the move. Bullets tore through the building, shattering crates and igniting fires. The firefight was chaotic and brutal, leaving several of Tierney's men injured and a few dead. The first strike proved that Dritan was not only ruthless, but also several steps ahead. Surveillance cameras, hidden lookouts, and carefully placed traps revealed the Albanians' sophisticated network. Tierney realized that this war would not be fought on mere territory. It would be a battle of intelligence, cunning, and survival. Every move had to be calculated. Any mistake could cost lives. As the firefight ended and the smoke cleared, both sides regrouped. Malone, still shaken from his near-death experience, swore loyalty but understood that their previous confidence was shattered. The Albanians had shown that fear could be weaponized and that even the most secure crew was vulnerable. The streets of Brooklyn became a chessboard of deadly strategy, with each gang carefully maneuvering, probing weaknesses, and setting traps. Law enforcement began to notice the escalation, but the sophistication of both gangs made intervention difficult. Each clash was surgical, leaving minimal evidence but maximum impact. Rumors of the war spread through the city, whispers of executions, ambushes, and retaliation, creating an atmosphere of terror. Tierney knew that his crew could not afford another mistake. The Albanians were ruthless, patient, and relentless. The first strike had ended, but the war had truly begun. Both sides had tasted blood, and neither was willing to back down. The Albanian Mafia had made their intentions clear, and the Liverpool crew understood that survival depended on strategy, loyalty, and a willingness to embrace brutality. In the shadowed streets of New York, the first chapter of a deadly war had been written, and the cost of failure was measured in blood. As the war raged on, the city became a maze of danger and uncertainty. Every corner, every alley, every abandoned building could be a trap. The Liverpool crew felt the weight of constant surveillance and the unseen threat of Albanian ambushes. Callum Tierney knew that brute force alone would not be enough to survive. Strategy and caution were now as vital as loyalty and firepower. The Albanians, led by Dritan Hoxha, moved like shadows, striking quickly and disappearing without leaving a trace. Their precision was terrifying, and each attack left Tierney's crew more paranoid and exhausted. Tierney's lieutenant, Evan Malone, struggled with the psychological toll. Each close call gnawed at his confidence, and every sound in the night set his nerves on edge. The crew had once relied on their unity and street smarts, But now the constant threat of ambush and betrayal forced them to question everyone's loyalty. Safe houses were no longer safe. Communications had to be encrypted and coded. Even the simplest movement could become a deadly misstep. The Albanians had turned the city into a battlefield where trust was a liability and fear was a constant companion. Inside the Albanian ranks, tension was also mounting. Besnik Kola, a young enforcer with a fierce reputation, began to question the orders he was given. The killings were efficient, but the collateral damage unsettled him. Innocent bystanders, neighbors, even children had been caught in the crossfire of their attacks. For the first time, Besnik wondered if their mission was purely for domination, or if it had become a reckless spree of violence with no purpose beyond destruction. Yet loyalty and fear kept him following orders, each mission pushing him deeper into moral conflict. Meanwhile, Tierney faced another, more insidious threat: betrayal within his own crew. A mole had infiltrated the Liverpool gang, feeding information to the Albanians and undermining Tierney's strategies. Every operation was scrutinized, every plan leaked, and the margin for error shrank with each passing day. The mole's presence created an atmosphere of suspicion. Friends whispered in hushed tones, and alliances that had been rock solid began to crumble. Tierney realized that the greatest threat was not just Dritan's men, but the erosion of trust among those he had once considered family. The body count continued to rise, leaving a trail of fear across Brooklyn, Queens, and Manhattan. The violence spilled into neighborhoods, turning once bustling streets into zones of tension and caution. Residents noticed strangers watching from windows, unusual vehicles parked for hours, and the faint sound of engines in the night. The underworld had never seen a conflict with such precision and psychological impact, and law enforcement struggled to keep pace with the carefully orchestrated chaos. Both gangs learned that survival was no longer guaranteed. Every decision carried weight. Every movement could be a fatal mistake. Tierney fortified his remaining crew, implemented tighter security, and planned carefully for counterattacks. Besnik's inner conflict within the Albanian ranks hinted that cracks were forming, a vulnerability that could be exploited. The war was no longer just a fight for territory. It had become a battle of intellect, loyalty, and endurance. As the city held its breath, both sides prepared for the next deadly encounter. The shadows of New York were thick with tension, paranoia, and the knowledge that one wrong move could mean death. The Liverpool crew and the Albanians were locked in a deadly dance, each side waiting, watching, and calculating. In the middle of it all, Tierney realized that the war was far from over, and the true test of leadership, courage, and survival was only beginning. The war had dragged on for months, and the tension had begun to gnaw at even the most loyal members of the Liverpool crew. Trust, once unshakable, was now fragile. Callum Tierney felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him, knowing that one misstep could cost the lives of everyone he had fought to protect. The streets were no longer just battlegrounds. They had become riddled with spies, informants, and hidden traps. Every operation had to be calculated with near-perfect precision, yet the Albanians always seemed one step ahead, anticipating Tierney's every move. The turning point came unexpectedly and shook the Liverpool crew to its core. Ryan Hargrove, Tierney's second-in-command, had always been ambitious, hungry for more power than he had earned. Quietly, he had been meeting with Dritan Hoxha's men, feeding them critical intelligence about Liverpool's operations. Hargrove's betrayal was subtle at first. Leaked plans, delayed warnings, misdirected communications. But the effects were devastating. One night, Tierney's men walked straight into an ambush in Brooklyn, a trap that could only have been laid with insider knowledge. The crew lost half of its members in the assault, and for the first time, Tierney faced the bitter reality that the enemy was not only outside his ranks, it was within. Dritan Hoxha, aware of Hargrove's treachery, used it to his advantage. He orchestrated a sequence of events that made it appear as though Tierney himself had plotted against some of his own men. Confusion and paranoia spread through the Liverpool crew like wildfire. Trust evaporated almost overnight. Friends and allies turned suspicious, and the once unified gang began to fracture. Tierney's leadership was tested in ways he had never imagined. Decisions that would normally have been straightforward now required caution and patience, and every step was shadowed by doubt. Despite the chaos, Tierney refused to surrender. Wounded but unbroken, he retreated into the underground, disappearing from the city's eyes. He moved silently, using hidden tunnels, abandoned buildings, and secret contacts to regroup. The loss of men and the betrayal of Hargrove hardened him. He realized that survival no longer depended solely on strength or loyalty. It required cunning, careful planning, and the ability to manipulate both friends and enemies. Meanwhile, the Albanians exploited their temporary advantage. Dritan's men strengthened their hold over key territories, controlled more shipments, and spread fear throughout New York's underworld. The city felt like it was under siege. The streets were tense, and whispers of death followed every corner. Law enforcement was baffled by the precision of the attacks, unable to trace the systematic strikes that left bodies in alleys and safe houses burned to ashes. But even as the Albanians celebrated their apparent victory, cracks began to form in their ranks. The loyalty of soldiers like Besnik Kola was tested, and doubt started to creep in. Hoxha's empire, while powerful, relied heavily on fear and intimidation. Tierney, observing from the shadows, realized that his enemy's arrogance could be exploited. Every betrayal, every bloodied street, and every fearful glance offered a sliver of opportunity. Tierney's retreat was not a surrender, it was a calculated pause. He vanished to rebuild, plan, and prepare for retaliation. The war had escalated into a complex game of deception and strategy, where alliances were fragile, loyalty was scarce, and survival depended on outthinking the enemy. The stage was set for a shocking comeback, one that would test the limits of both the Liverpool crew and the Albanian Mafia. The next chapter of the war would not only be fought with bullets, but with cunning, betrayal, and a willingness to exploit every weakness. Months of planning and patience had transformed Callum Tierney from a hunted leader into a ghost in the city, unseen yet everywhere. He had rebuilt his crew from the survivors, handpicking men he knew were loyal beyond question, and carefully recruited new allies from rival gangs who shared a common interest in seeing the Albanians weakened. Tierney had learned from past mistakes. This time, the war would be fought not just with guns, but with strategy, manipulation, and psychological warfare. Every move would be precise, every attack coordinated, and every Albanian misstep would be exploited. The first phase of Tierney's retaliation was subtle but devastating. He began by cutting off key supply lines that Dritan Hoxha's empire relied on. Trucks carrying weapons and drugs were intercepted. Intercepted shipments disappeared, and financial channels were disrupted. Tierney used insiders and corrupt contacts within the city to feed false intelligence to the Albanians, creating confusion and paranoia. Dritan's men, who had once been untouchable, started to doubt each other, questioning every order and fearing betrayal from within. The empire that had seemed so impenetrable was beginning to crack. Tierney's second strike was physical and brutal. Safe houses that had once been Albania's strongholds were hit in precise raids. Explosions rocked warehouses, vehicles were torched, and key lieutenants were eliminated with surgical efficiency. Tierney's crew moved like shadows, striking and vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. Each action sent a clear message. The Liverpool gang was back, stronger and more determined than ever. The streets of Manhattan and Brooklyn became a chessboard, with Tierney manipulating the Albanians' movements, predicting their reactions, and leaving them vulnerable at every turn. The psychological aspect of the retaliation was equally powerful. Tierney made sure the Albanians felt fear creeping into their ranks. Anonymous messages, staged sightings, and controlled leaks created an environment of suspicion. Soldiers began to question their loyalty to Dritan, wondering if every order would lead them to death. Tierney understood that an enemy in doubt was already half defeated, and he used this to weaken the Albanians from within while preparing for the final phase of his strike. As Dritan's empire began to crumble, Tierney executed his most audacious moves. He personally coordinated the takedown of several key territories, cutting the Albanians off from their profits and disrupting their dominance over the city's drug trade. Street-level dealers who once reported to Dritan now switched allegiance, intimidated by Tierney's resurgence and the efficiency of his operations. The momentum had shifted, and the Albanians found themselves reacting rather than acting, forced into defensive positions while Tierney dictated the pace of the war. Even with victory approaching, the cost was immense. Many of Tierney's loyal men had been lost in earlier battles, and the city bore the scars of months of war. Yet the Liverpool crew had learned to adapt, survive, and strike with precision. The Albanians, once feared as an unstoppable force, were now weakened, their internal conflicts laid bare, and their confidence shattered. Tierney's calculated retaliation had not only regained territory, but had sent a clear message. Betrayal and arrogance would not be tolerated, and those who underestimated the Liverpool gang would pay the ultimate price. As the city slowly adjusted to this new order, one fact remained clear. The war was far from ordinary. It had been fought with intelligence, cruelty, and a relentless pursuit of dominance. And while the Albanians had been pushed back, Tierney knew that the true test of control, both over his crew and the streets, was yet to come. The final showdown loomed like a storm over New York, a confrontation that would decide the fate of both criminal empires. Callum Tierney had rebuilt his crew, strengthened alliances, and meticulously planned every move for the ultimate strike. He knew that Dritan Hoxha would not surrender, that the Albanian kingpin was as ruthless as he was cunning, and that only a combination of strategy, timing, and bold action could end the war in his favor. Every detail mattered. Every misstep could mean death. The confrontation took place in an abandoned warehouse in Queens, a neutral zone that had been carefully chosen for its isolation and tactical advantages. Tierney's men approached silently, weapons concealed, shadows merging with the night. Surveillance had revealed that Dritan's inner circle would be present, a rare gathering that offered Tierney a chance to strike decisively. The tension was electric, each second stretching like an eternity as both sides waited for the spark that would ignite chaos. When the first shots rang out, the warehouse erupted into a maelstrom of violence. Bullets ricocheted off metal beams, crates exploded, and smoke filled the air. Tierney's crew moved with precision, executing coordinated strikes they had practiced in secret for weeks. Dritan's men fought back with the same ruthless efficiency that had terrified New York, but Tierney's careful planning gave his crew the advantage. Every exit was covered, every angle accounted for, and every Albanian move anticipated. Amid the chaos, a crucial twist emerged. Besnik Kola, the Albanian enforcer who had once questioned the morality of his orders, made a shocking choice. Secretly, he had aligned himself with Tierney, feeding critical information about Dritan's positions and vulnerabilities. His betrayal was a turning point, allowing Tierney to isolate key lieutenants and force Dritan into a defensive position. The Albanians, who had once seemed invincible, now found themselves outmaneuvered in their own stronghold. The battle raged on, brutal and unrelenting. Tierney moved like a phantom, striking decisively while minimizing exposure to his own men. The warehouse became a battlefield of shadows and violence, each corner hiding deadly threats. Explosions, gunfire, and shattered wood filled the air, creating a scene of chaos that only heightened the suspense. Tierney's meticulous strategy and the insider intelligence provided by Besnik turned the tide, demonstrating that the war was as much about cunning as it was about strength. Finally, Dritan Hoxha found himself cornered, outnumbered, and outsmarted. His empire, built on fear and precision, crumbled in the span of hours. Tierney offered no mercy. The man who had once controlled vast territories in New York now fled into the shadows, abandoning everything he had built. The Albanians scattered, their network fractured, and their influence over the city shattered. Tierney had not only survived, but emerged victorious, his crew scarred but stronger, having endured the most dangerous and calculated conflict the East Coast had ever seen. In the aftermath, the streets slowly returned to a tense normalcy. The scars of battle remained visible in burned-out buildings, abandoned warehouses, and whispered rumors that spread through the underworld. Tierney had proven that intelligence, patience, and loyalty could triumph over brute force and fear. Yet the cost was heavy. Lives had been lost, alliances tested, and the city would forever remember the deadly war between the Liverpool crew and the Albanian Mafia. For Tierney, the victory was bittersweet, a testament to survival, strategy, and the relentless pursuit of power in a world where loyalty and betrayal were inseparable.